All right, class, we're going to go over some trig identity formulas, and we'll go over some problems that you could see on your test. So here are the formulas that you need. We're going to try to change everything in terms of sine and cosine on our test. And so I just left sine as sine, cosine, cosine. Tangent, if you see tangent, change it to sine over cosine. If you see cosecant, change it to 1 over sine. Secant is 1 over cosine, and cotangent would be tangent flipped as cosine over sine. And you also need this Pythagorean identity. Sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. And these two right here is just this one rearranged. If I chunk cosine squared over there, you'll have sine squared equals 1 minus cosine squared. Or if you chunk sine squared to the other side, you'll have cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared. So you need these for your trig identity problems. Okay, let's look at number 1. Number 1 says, which of the following is equal to sine theta times secant theta? Okay, so anytime you see a function that's not sine or cosine, we're going to change it. And so let's rewrite secant theta. So we have sine theta times secant theta is cosine flipped over, so it's 1 over cosine. Alright, so now I'm doing sine theta times 1 over cosine theta. So you could put this over 1. We're multiplying straight across, sine times 1, 1 times cosine. That gives me sine theta over cosine theta. And sine theta over cosine theta equals tangent theta. Okay, number 2 says, which of the following is equal to tan theta times cosecant theta divided by sine theta times secant theta? So we're going to change tangent, cosecant, and secant. So let's do that. Tangent is sine theta over cosine theta times cosecant is 1 over sine theta. Sine theta, leave it, times secant is 1 over cosine. So once we do this, now let's simplify the top and the bottom. So if I multiply straight across, well, if you have trig functions diagonally that are the same and we're multiplying, we can cancel these out. So sine and sine cancel. And so this equals 1 over cosine divided by, this will be sine over cosine. Okay. So once we get here, we have a fraction divided by a fraction. When you're dividing fractions, you're multiplying by the reciprocal. So we'll keep, change, flip. Keep, change to multiply, flip the denominator. So I have 1 over cosine times the reciprocal, cosine over sine. Okay, look diagonally. We can cancel the cosines. So this will be 1 over sine, and 1 over sine is equal to cosecant. Okay, number 3, we have sine squared divided by cosine times tangent. So I'm going to change tangent. So we have sine squared divided by cosine theta times sine over cosine. We can put this over 1. Diagonally, the cosines cancel. And so what we have is sine squared divided by sine. And think about your exponent rules. This is sine to the 1. If we're dividing and you got the same variable, like if you have x squared divided by x to the 1, we're subtracting the exponent, so that's just x. And so same thing here, we're subtracting, so this is going to be just sine. Just sine theta. All right, number 4, we're going to change tan. So I have cosine x divided by sine over cosine times sine. Okay. So on my denominator, I'm just multiplying straight across. So we'll have cosine x divided by sine squared over cosine. Alright. So we are dividing by a fraction, so we want to multiply by the reciprocal. And so I have cosine x times, flipped, cosine x over sine squared. Okay. So multiplying straight across, cosine times cosine. This gives me cosine squared divided by sine squared. Okay. So remember on your identities, cosine over sine is secant. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, cotangent. Cosine over sine is cotangent. And so cosine squared over sine squared would be cotangent squared. And that is our answer. Okay, number 5, we have cosecant x times tangent x. Let's rewrite both of them. Cosecant is 1 over sine times tangent is sine over cosine. Diagonally, the signs cancel. And so this will be 1 over cosine x. And 1 over cosine is secant. Alright, number 6, which of the following is not equal to tangent x? And so there's the one answer choice that says cosine x over sine x. This is not tangent, this would be cotangent. So that's our answer on 6. And number 7 is pretty much the same question as number 6. Cotangent theta equals p. Which of the following must equal p? Cosine theta is cotangent theta is cosine theta over sine theta. Okay, number 8, we have the square root of 1 minus cosine squared theta divided by sine squared theta times cosine theta. Alright, anytime you see this right here, 1 minus cosine squared, or 1 minus sine squared, or cosine squared plus sine squared, look at those Pythagorean identities on your formula sheet, the ones on the bottom. So 1 minus cosine squared, I'm going to change it to sine squared. So this will be the square root of sine squared divided by sine squared times cosine. The square root of sine squared is just sine, because sine times sine gives you sine squared. So square root of sine is sine divided by sine squared times cosine. Okay, this is sine to the 1 over sine squared. This will be 1 over sine times cosine. Multiplying straight across, we get cosine over sine. Cosine over sine is cotangent theta. Number 9, cosecant x times secant x times tangent x. Let's change all 3 of them. This is 1 over sine x times 1 over cosine x times sine over cosine x. Alright, if you look diagonally, we can cancel these signs. And so I have 1 over cosine squared. 1 over cosine is secant. 1 over cosine squared is secant squared. Number 10, secant theta minus sine theta times tangent theta. Let's change secant and tangent. That's 1 over cosine theta minus sine theta times sine over cosine. Okay? Let's multiply these two. All right. Now we have two fractions. We're subtracting two fractions. You have to have same denominator if you're adding or subtracting fractions. We do. And so now we'll combine our numerators and put over our common denominator. So this is 1 minus sine squared over cosine. Okay, Pythagorean identity, 1 minus sine squared, that's cosine squared, over cosine. Cosine squared divided by cosine is just cosine.